most of them. Our problems are big. They are caused in large part by global issues, and they require long-term planning, not the kind of short-term fixes that the U.S. Congress fixates on. But we need a good example, and we actually have one. It's China. Christine Romans, host of Your Bottom Line, joins me now. Christine, Jim Rogers is making a big bet on China.
Right, and Allie, when Jim Rogers bets, you should pay attention. He's bearish on America, so why is he placing his money and his family in Asia? We took a walk in the park so he could explain. Let me ask you about China. Is China the answer here? I mean, China's slowing as well.
China's been trying to slow its economy for 3 years, rightly so. They got overheated. They had a property bubble. They need to have inflation. They need to slow down. No, China cannot save us, Christine. They've done a great job. The American and European economies together are 10 times as big as China. Right. 10 times. So even if China booms, if the rest of us have problems, China cannot save us, no matter how smart they might be.
A lot of people think we're looking back on a chapter that'll be written in the history book where the 19th century belonged to the UK, to England, where the 20th century belongs to the United States, and the 21st century belongs to China and the big rising Asian nations. Do you think so?
I have sold my house in New York. I have moved to Asia, and my girls speak Mandarin, speak perfect Mandarin. What more can I tell you? I'm preparing them for the 21st century by knowing Asia and by speaking perfect Mandarin.
Can you still get rich in America, or do you only get rich in China?
It's easier to get rich in Asia than it is in America now. The wind is in your face. We're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world. In China, I mean, all the assets in the world.
Are you bearish America?
Aren't you? Don't you know we're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world? I don't like saying this. I'm an American taxpayer and citizen like you. But we're the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, and the debts are going up by $1 trillion, over $1 trillion every year. The largest creditor nations in the world are China, Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. The assets are in Asia. You know who the debtors are and where they are. Look at Greece. Look at Spain. I mean, I don't like saying this, you know. I'm an American too, but facts are facts.
So if those are the facts that Jim Rogers lives by, what's he doing with his money? Well, he says he's short stocks, short U.S. stocks. He also says you gotta own real things like silver and rice, real commodities. He still likes commodities. He has gold in his pocket, Allie. He carries around gold coins in his pocket,
wow.
But he's not buying more gold here. He's not buying more gold here, but he says that you got to look at stocks to be short. You got to be long commodities, and you got to just hold on buckle up for a couple of years that are going to be rough, he says.
Okay, you and I better get those little Rosetta Stone Mandarin things and buck up so that we're safe in our own in our own economies. Jim Rogers says that if you want to understand what China means to you and your financial future, you have to read a book called Winner Take All by Dambisa Moyo. Now, we took him so seriously that we brought her here, but before we ask her what we need to know about our competition with China, let me lay out her issue. And let's start with oil. Oil is still the thing that we consume in America more than anyone else. America is #1 in oil consumption in the world, using 22% of the world's oil every day. That's about a fifth. China is responsible for consuming about 10% of the world's oil. It's the only commodity, by the way, the only major commodity that the U.S. consumes more of than China. So let's look at some of the others. Every other one of these, wheat, aluminum, zinc, copper, and steel. Look at steel. America uses 5% of the world's steel. China, which is still building a lot of infrastructure, uses almost 46%. China uses more of all of these things except oil than America does, and China has a long-term plan for securing those resources that might put them at an advantage and puts the U.S. at a disadvantage. Dambisa Moyo, as I told you about, she's an economist. She's the author of Winner Take All, China's Race for Resources and What It Means to the World. Dambisa, thank you for joining us. Why does America not think this way? Why is America not out building those long-term relationships? In your book, you point to Africa, for instance, which has a much higher economic growth rate than America or Europe, and yet China is the key partner involved with these African countries in building resources and building infrastructure. America seems mostly consumed with matters that are coming due at the end of this year and short-term types of economic concerns.
Yeah. Well, I think you point out exactly what the schism that exists. The Chinese approach is a multilateral approach. They're focused on building symbiotic relationships with countries not just in Africa, in Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Russia, Kazakhstan, even Canada. And Australia, for example, is one of the largest, if not the largest recipient of foreign direct investment from China. And it is that which has been basically the big marker that has separated the Chinese approach from that of the United States, which has tended to be a a unilateral approach when looking to secure resources.
All right, so I started this discussion with Christine and talking to Jim Rogers about the idea that we need an example of long-term planning, and that perhaps America should look to China for that. They are not driven by the same political concerns that we're driven by in the United States, but they are driven by economic concerns. Is that a fair statement? Should the United States be taking that page out of the Chinese book? We don't want all the pages, but should we be taking that type of long-term planning page out of the Chinese book?
Absolutely. In the context of the United States and indeed Europe, the lens to look at economic problems, I believe, is three key ingredients: capital, labor, and productivity. And you can see in the United States and across Europe that these three key ingredients for economic growth have been eroded very, very detrimentally. If you look at capital, labor, and productivity in a place like China, we know they've got a lot of money. We know that their labor force is big and the quality is improving. And in terms of productivity, they've been significant productivity gains over the last several decades. So that is where the difference really lies. I would say that fundamentally, you would hope that there would be much more focus on long-term issues in the United States. But again, very rationally, political imperative in the United States and in democratic societies like Europe are driven by short-term concerns, incredibly focused on myopia, and you get what you pay for, basically. And it's a bit unfortunate.
Just address that. Let me address that.
One of the things that they could do, perhaps, is maybe extend the terms of a presidency, as they've done in South America, for example.
I was just going to get to, is it just because it's a mature democracy where we roll over governments on a regular basis, which, by the way, many Americans will think is a great idea. You can throw the bums out every 2 years in Congress and every 4 years everywhere else and 6 years in the Senate. But that does create short-term thinking. It creates less of an imperative to have long-term thinking and relationships the sort that China has developed.
Yes, absolutely. And, I think no one, whether you're on the left side or the right side, would disagree with the statement that the problems that the United States faces right now are basically at their core long-term problems. Issues around pensions, issues around poor and declining education standards, issues around deficits and debt. These are all structural problems that need to be addressed. But the way that you solve those things are very painful long-term solutions. And in a myopic sort of short-term democratic cycle where you have elections every 2 years, there is no space for an incumbent president or Congress or Senate to focus on those issues when every other year there's a new election campaign to be fought.
Dambisa Moyo, pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much. Dambisa Moyo is an economist. He's the author of Winner Take All, China's Race for Resources and What It Means for the World. Later,